was wrong. And hopefully this is right, which should be the revamp sponsor list. Let's give it a shot. No music. Well, read this, everybody. And I'll do it again by reading it off so everybody can be mentioned. But there's no music, so I have to fix that. So our new sponsor, I'm very happy to have Stone Depot. We'll have Danielle on the next few weeks. Redemption Cannabis, Real Leaf Solution, Detroit Nutrient Company, Grow Green, Michigan, Custom 420 promo in their culture clothing line. And there you go. So I have to work on it, but there's our new list. So anyway, we're going to get to the news about what's going on with the Cannabis Regulatory Agency, but I want to mention a couple people. We had some more community members pass away recently. Unfortunately, I just want to acknowledge and give tribute to Barb Agro, and we'll talk about her a little bit more in a second. And John, I can't think of his last name at the moment. I'm sorry.
Bozung.
Yeah, from Jackson area, worked a lot with the Mofarts and they're very JC3 and all that kind of stuff. And I remember he had I think he had like this competing line of an insecticide, a natural insecticide of some kind that he was also, branding and selling for a little while. But he did a lot of work and helped me to get, work with the local government in Leone. I remember he was around when Ryan and I were working on that a little bit. And, pretty relatively young. I don't know anything about what happened. Maybe there's some more information that you guys have, but just sucks. Obviously came in a group here, and then Barb was part of a family. Her son Nick Agro is part of the industry now, with high level health, cultivation, and retail stores. Their family was kind of involved in a very early dispensary in Ferndale. Nick's from Michigan. He was out in Colorado for a little while, though. He was getting involved in the industry there as he had his catering business. He came to Michigan. He ended up coming by Third Coast and working with us a little bit, and we worked with him. They eventually opened in Ferndale. They had to go ahead from local government, and they were still rated on a county level by Sheriff Bizarre and the narcotics enforcement team. And there's a lot more to it, and there were other raids that took place along with them, but it was into the businesses and the homes. And Nick's father, Barb's husband, passed away a couple days later, and they fought their charges. It took about 7 years. They had a great legal team: Mary Chartier, Thomas Loeb, I think Stuart Friedman, Neil Rockheim, more probably, and they ended up winning, after like 7 years, but it didn't absolve all the issues. So she was the matriarch of that family, and they're a big part of the history, and they've been through a lot. So I want to pay some tribute and acknowledge the fact that she passed away. Does anybody else want to get in on either John or Barb?
No, I was very familiar with Barb from the early days, and her case, the case of what happened in Ferndale. That's the first known example of Oakland County police officers creating fake medical marijuana cards in order to get their way into an establishment. Security at their place was so tight that you could not get in unless you had a medical marijuana card, and you couldn't get a medical marijuana card if you were a cop. So cops created false identities to apply for medical marijuana cards so that they would come in with false personas in order to get inside and see what was happening inside there. I also remember that there was one of the first places where someone cut out a picture and put it on a medical marijuana card to try and gain entrance using a fraudulent method like that. And it was proven in court. This is not just supposition.
That's perfectly legal to do. Yeah.
Yeah, before they put the seals on the cards, it was just a blank white card, and they just copied the design and printed on blank white cards. They added their ID, their photo to the area where it says photo there. That was the first tip that Jorge's bringing up Big Daddies.
Yep.
Real quick.
That's
Involved
me.
in the Oakland County bullshit. Yep, for sure. Oak Park.
Attorney Paul Youngs knows that Sheriff Bouchard of Oakland County is an asshole.
Right. That is true. The way he chose to handle stuff, no matter what the interpretations of the law or how the courts are willing to handle them and stuff like that, is still fucked up, and he is an asshole for that. And he's still the sheriff, although the prosecutor has now been upgraded significantly with Karen McDonald over Jessica Cooper. Yeah, and other, not in, of course, activity like that or that type of bias toward handling that issue, not unique to Oakland County, but they did it a lot. And they were caught up in all that stuff, and that really sucks.
This really sucks having to memorialize people almost once or twice a month now, and I can appreciate anytime one of our people goes, one of our significant folks, we should make a comment. But man, it's just a lot this summer. It's just a lot.
Josh Smith was up in the waiting room for a second. I didn't bring him on yet. He's going to join us from Abko Labs, and we'll talk about some stuff that have to do with cannabis testing, what's going on recently, and some things within reason, and then also some guys putting on a state licensed production in Hartford, are going to come on and discuss their philosophical approach to this event, and what it's about and how they got there and that kind of stuff. But if Josh wants to come back on and be part of this conversation until we start the segment, that's totally cool. So I just didn't get a chance to bring him on yet. And so, Preston, Brisboe. And so first shakeup, I just want to say, just get it out of the way. There was, because we talked about the tincture thing, Anton and Rick meet with the department regularly, and they brought up the tincture issue, the definition and why it was applied and what it means. And one of the things that is now solved, an issue that came out of all that, is by allowing 200 milligrams for infused product on the adult use market. And those that had tinctures that were 200 milligrams, thinking that they were tinctures, now have something to work with, so they're not just screwed. And people were, concerned, and we're in that position. So that's a good idea. But yesterday, I'll turn it over to Rick pretty quickly because he's totally hip and has been seeing some of the actual reports coming out. We started hearing word about Andrew Brisboe resigning, and looking into it, the sources, kept on confirming, and we still didn't have total support yet, but apparently all that stuff has come out. It is true. And what do we know about it so far, Rick?
This, let's just call it exit, has been reported by the Detroit News, the Detroit Free Press, and MLive, all three trusted media sources in the state. Detroit News is probably the most informative of the three. It states that Director Brisboe will leave the executive director's position of the Cannabis Regulatory Agency to lead the Bureau of Construction Codes. Talk about going from a high-energy, fast-paced, lively world to a dead, almost punishment job, in my mind. Bureau of Construction Codes, that sounds so boring. September 17th seems to be the target date for him to make the transition over. It has been made clear to me from some of my insiders that this was not a move that the director sought. So you can interpret that any way you want, but I interpreted it to mean somebody said get rid of him, and they did. And that's reinforced, actually, unfortunately, by the very last line of the which is a little blurb from those people that we don't like very much, the Michigan Cannabis Manufacturers Association. That statement says the association looks forward to working with the Whitmer administration and a new director on ramping up enforcement of illegal activity. So if you're looking for a reason why Director Brisboe is not in office anymore, it's probably, in my opinion, because of the influence of some of the larger corporate players in the state who wanted several things the director couldn't give them. They wanted access to the Native American market, which he was in the process of trying. They wanted to limit cultivation licenses, which the Licensing and Regulatory Affairs is forbidden from doing by the language of our 2018 CRMLA division. And he was slow or ineffective to resolve the Viridis scandal, which has already cost some companies their livelihood. Spot Labs, I'm thinking of, and other places that are probably struggling very valiantly right now, including maybe Abko Labs when we have our representative on later today. So there were several concerns that happened during Director Brisboe's tenure. I'll tell you what, though, and I said this to Gus Burns earlier today in an interview. I've worked with every director that has been involved in Department of Community Health, Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, all of those people. Nobody was as good as Brisboe. He was so easy to work with, and he listened, actually, which is refreshing and unusual for a person in government. So I am sad to see him go.
Very sad. Yeah, he was a good dude. Is a good dude, I should say. He always, like you said, Rick, it's not often that you have a bureaucrat who gives the appearance of really wanting to listen to not only their employees, but those around them in the consumer world and the scientific world and all these other different facets of the industry. I always felt the conversations we've had with him, he was listening and he was processing. It wasn't dismissive as what a lot of other type of bureaucratic folks kind of do when you speak with them.
You know, if you look at the number of work groups that the director created, and the work groups are specifically consumer or business groups gathered to give the regulators their insight and their experience and to let them know what's happening on a street level in the industry. You had a testing work group, there's a social equity work group, there's our Cannabis Consumer Connection work group that we have. There are many different work groups. I mean, I've never seen anybody try and take as much input as he has. So,
you know, at least the statement by the MCMA was to address illegal activity. I'm not necessarily, you know, aligned with them and being aggressive toward what they consider illegal activity. We talked about replacing when necessary, you know, civil approaches as opposed to criminal approaches to those things. But before, they were clearly going after existing rights. At least they phrased it that they were after illegal activity in their minds.
No, that's the same phraseology they've used since they started coming after us.
Well, there's kind of a load of bullshit there too, as far as they can want and wish all they want, but the reality is many county prosecutors in this state are not even willing to prosecute these cases. Right. And when prosecutors are not willing to prosecute, cops are not going to enforce, because if there's no prosecution, it's a complete waste of police time, money, and resources. So they can shit in one hand and wish in the other, as far as I'm concerned, because what they want and what is reality in this state is just, it's not, they don't coincide.
I'd like to say too that I think that their goal is to ramp up attention on all activity, including driving while under the influence of cannabis. That has suddenly gotten a lot more attention nationally and here in the state too. Jimmy, I know you were about to say something and I cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Keep going. Sorry. I'll get these people on here.
I'm just very, very concerned that when the MCMA, however many companies there are left in the MCMA now, when they say that they want to go after illegal activity, I think what we consider to be commonplace activity is what they consider to be illegal activity.
Right. There's usage that it would have to be known to have this discussion properly, so that we don't get confused over what we mean with what they're after.
The very hardworking and exhausted Christiana here in our chat. Good afternoon, Christiana. Back to you. Yeah, pleasantries and high life are selling. There's a lot of consolidation in the market, but that doesn't necessarily mean that some of the bad players are going to be gone. You know, pleasantries.
More people, with that philosophy.
Yep, still keep that same philosophy or same leadership team.
Yeah,
I had
I agree. So what I was going to say before though is when we had the fundraiser for Dana Nessel, and just if I sound negative or something like that, to be clear, I'm voting for Dana Nessel, and people who are looking for any kind of direction, what's best for cannabis and probably civil rights at large, no matter what kind of frustrations there may be with her on any issue or not going far enough with cannabis in this first term. In my opinion, she remains the best candidate, and she has my vote, and I'm going to support her, through the process, through the November, and vote for her. When we had the fundraiser for her, she alluded, without being specific, to the State Department, the CRA not quite handling something correctly. And I don't know what that is still. And I don't know if it had to do with the Viridis investigation. And I don't know if that means that they didn't get to Viridis fast enough, or that they gave Viridis too much shit, or I don't know. Or if it has to do with that at all and has to do with something else, maybe that we've even discussed here, as far as the approach. Kind of sounds like he got the equivalent to, you get a post out in Alaska, kind of a thing. So, I don't know what's going on. It'll be interesting to maybe get some information as it unfolds, but we'll see.
I hope so too. But you're kind of right, Jamie. Bureau of Construction Codes is sort of the equivalent to being stationed in Siberia, right? That seems like a joyless administrative quagmire.
Well,
Hey, so we do have Josh Smith joining us, who's representing Abko Labs. I don't know if it's the proper label. We'll get more into like your introduction in a few minutes, but you are a molecular biologist.
That's true. My graduate degree is clinical microbiology originally. So I like to say Renaissance man is the way I kind of go.
Okay. Right on. So we are talking about the fact that our director of the Cannabis Regulatory Agency has, I guess, resigned or been transferred to another department. And, we're just kind of wondering what that's all about. We don't believe, and in fact, the reports are that it wasn't something he was necessarily looking for.
Well, I would say it's going to be hard to tell until, if he does go somewhere else and gets another job somewhere, then you might know kind of if there's a reason for anything. But I mean, I would say for the next week, it's probably going to be a toss up in the air of why it happened.
I will say that it's clear in one of the articles they make mention that he cannot go to an industry in the cannabis world. Anyone that receives licensure from the state, he's prevented from working for them for 4 years under an amendment that happened in 2019 that was cited in the Detroit Free Press article.
So Shelly Edgerton was grandfathered in, so to speak.
Exactly right. I think that's the Shelly Edgerton rule, actually. Yeah. Shelly, for those who don't know, is the former head of the marijuana regulatory agency, but she left and went immediately. Well, she had a little time in a law firm before she went to to one of the companies that she had just been responsible for licensing and administering, which we thought was incredibly inappropriate.
Yeah, that's a little raises some red flags.
It's Michigan. Red flags are everywhere, and I'm not talking about construction sites either. But so, Josh, clearly, in my mind, if we look at some of the reasons why this might have happened, I believe industry pressure on the governor's office, maybe on the attorney general's office too, might have had an influence there. And some of that pressure is certainly related to the testing industry. I would think that's fair to say, don't you?
Oh, it is. The last year, for anybody that's even hasn't been paying attention, has not been the easiest waters to navigate. So, I wouldn't be surprised at all if that had something to do with it. But
I mean, labs are frustrated at Viridis and labs are frustrated at the state. It seems like for different reasons.
I think in general, we're all stuck with the same problem, right? It's lab shopping, and there's only one industry or one place that can really do anything about it. And they are severely understaffed, severely strapped for resources. And it's until something changes and they are either able to or start doing what they are actually supposed to do, which is regulate the labs and regulate the industry, it's going to be very difficult. And labs like us are stuck dealing with people who are lab shopping. I mean, as a business, it's understandable if everyone else is doing it. You have to do it to survive at some point. But I'm actually surprised more distillers, processors, those kind of guys aren't suing the pants off these growers that are giving them COAs that are at 25, 30, 50% THC when they actually go and extract it. They know their extraction efficiencies. They know exactly how much they should get out based on that percentage of that COA, if it's true. Now, and they're paying that premium for it. I'd be a little pissed off and if it was my business and I had just paid a whole lot of money for some stock and to make my concentrate, and it ends up I'm getting half the yield.
That does sound actionable to me. And for those viewers who may not be familiar with the term lab shopping, in any cannabis market, unfortunately, most people make purchases based on a THC percentage. So in their mind, the higher the THC percentage, the more potent the cannabis. They relate it something to similar to a proof in alcohol. And that means that sometimes labs will give you a higher THC number and therefore make your cannabis more marketable. And when they do that, they get a lot more customers because people would prefer to have a higher THC number on the package.
I like to think of it
like 60% of the market or something like that. But go ahead, Josh.
I was just going to say, so labs like us, we're stuck trying to combat that. I like to tell people when they're talking about the high THC point, really, in my mind, it comes down to it's an uneducated consumer, right? You have people coming in off the street that just all they know is I want to go get high. So we're going to go, and I know THC, so I'm thinking I'm getting the most bang for my buck with a higher amount of THC, when in fact your body, it doesn't work that way. You have cannabinoid receptors that max out at certain percentages, but to
get saturated, right?
Yeah, I like to tell people, really, when it comes down to it, you can go to the liquor store right now and you can buy a bottle of Everclear or Moonshine. Why don't you? Because it tastes like ass. Plain and simple.
It's a selling point for some people, but
I just want to get back to Viridis thing for a second, and they don't necessarily agree with some of the accusations. There is an investigation that does not have a conclusion yet. There's things like that. So I mean, just disclaimer a little bit that opinion, speculation, that type of stuff. But while the state should have acted faster, what I see is a situation, in part anyway, where what's going on is just brazen. I mean, passing every microbial, high THC numbers, 40%, just really stupid shit like that. So just blatantly, not approving the method, and just all this ongoing, issue like that. I just don't know if the state expected that to be imposed on them to that degree.
They are behaving like they're untouchable.
Yeah, and then they have all these blue chip law firms that are just really, creating these arguments and, in whatever manner, keeping the process out.
Whenever you've got the money and that high-powered law firms going to bat for you, it helps no matter what your issues are. Right. So I will say, from our standpoint, again, the only thing I will drop in on it is from their own supplied documents to the court cases. If you look back when the recall happened, if you go through some of the exhibits that they supplied in their defense, was that, they had to have, during an on-site inspection, they had to be retrained on spotting powdery mildew.
That's pretty ridiculous.
You saw that, you read the story that was on public record of, how the examination, the analysis took place in front of one of them.
Oh, I read their entire briefing that they went through, and their rebuttal briefing. I read the entire slide documents. I also went through and read through the whole thing that the state just dropped, about 2 months ago, a month and a half ago.
Right.
So, I mean, if according to that document, and that is true, the part that would drive me up the wall is that if what the state says is true, and they have not supplied validation documents for their potency tests, that is astounding. If they have not submitted that, because anytime any lab, no matter what, in order to be approved for a test, you have to submit your validation packet. In order to be ISO 17025 2017 certified, you must submit that validation packet. Doesn't matter for what test it is, if you are accredited for it, you must submit it. I cannot even test whether flower, concentrated, edible, anything for THC if I have not supplied that potency test validation packet to the state. So if that is true, how they still are operating is astounding to me.
I agree, Josh. What we're talking about, and Jamie mentioned it before too, not submitting your testing. For those people who are not familiar, Viridis, one of the concerns that we have about them is the inflated THC testing. They use what's called the Viridis method, which is a only they get to use it technique, which delivers these exceptionally high THC numbers, and the state hasn't approved that technique. So they're really putting out data that's not approved by the state, and in doing it, as Jamie mentioned, but it was really brief, so many people may have missed it. Viridis says they cover 50 to 60% of all the testing market in the entire state just in their 2 locations. Now, Josh, there's a dozen testing labs beside Viridis in the state,
Roughly,
and that there's no question that means not only are they approaching monopoly status, but they're also a threat to the industry. If something were to happen to Viridis, for example, if they were to lose their license, then a huge amount of testing would have to be redistributed to other places. The samples that they have, it's not certain what would happen to those. Would they have to rebatch, resample, and then start over with the whole process? It would just be devastating. That's why you cannot allow one company to have such a huge stranglehold on the industry that they're too big to fail.
Well, we have a wonderful tool, and they're using it in Arkansas, and I hope it makes its way into Michigan, which is RICO. And the way they're using it in Arkansas for inflated THC cases, it's genius. And I think that greed eventually at the end of the day is going to come back and probably haunt a few people that didn't maybe plan on this in the beginning. And, I hope that we see some of these tools that, you can have the highest powered lawyers in the world. RICO is a tough investigation to overcome when they got you. So who knows what's going on in the background. I hope if this is going on and it's proven, that those who've done this will be held accountable. But I guess that's for the courts to decide, right?
Just to tell people what you're referring to it's Arkansas, I think, right?
Arkansas, yes.
So in Arkansas, the prosecutors are claiming that the labs and the cultivators were in collusion to fix prices, that the cultivators would actually give, an additional compensation to the lab for having these fixed prices, and that you give to me, I give to you on a secret deal. That's the RICO. So you can't have a RICO if there's no conspiracy, and that's the foundation upon which they base that. And boy, it sure seems a lot like that type of stuff might be happening in this state, Josh, wouldn't you think?
Oh, I mean, I'm not going to say if it is or isn't. I am going to say the fact that I have gone to potential clients and they have asked me what THC numbers I can give them. And I say, well, exactly what you grow.
what they are, right? There's
yeah, what they are.
I
mean, I'm not going to give you a number I can't give you or usually I end up not getting that customer. So, I will throw out, and that I know from having to discuss a lot of things with, because we have to talk to our own auditors all the time. It's got to be a really tough job to do when you only have 2 people covering every single lab, the auditing, the literally everything about the licensing expansions checks in the state. So I do give the guys a little, the boots on the ground some slack, because that's a tough thing to handle for anybody. I'm seeing in the comments here. Do you guys mind if I want to?
No, please jump in.
Mention something. Yeah. Spartan Grown. I see you're mentioning Qpcr testing.
Yes.
So I've got patents on actual Qpcr tests. I set up a facility way back when at the University of Wisconsin Biotech Center for this. The problem with Qpcr for microbials was more the supplier. They were claiming things that it couldn't. Anybody that will tell you you can accurately quantitate a total anything, whether it's yeast and mold or total coliforms, after you grow something up in enrichment, they're lying out of their pants. You cannot do it. As a microbiologist, you cannot do that. Anybody that tells me that, I look at them and say, whatever you're selling me is a load of shit. So we still do Qpcr testing. We do it for Salmonella, E. coli, our S-type E. coli, and for Aspergillus. So plating is actually the gold standard, and half the clinics you go to, if you go and get a culture done, that's what it's going on. Other ones, it's on moldy and a few other things. But, Qpcr for microbials actually was a far lower bar than plating is.
Okay, so it serves a great purpose, but not necessarily the best.
It's a wonderful tool, but it not only can it not distinguish between live dead unless it's properly treated beforehand. That's part of what the enrichment's for. But it is very, very DNA specific. So the more organisms you try to look at with a Qpcr, the harder it is for that Qpcr to be accurate.
Right.
There's lots of exceptions to that, and depending on how you build it. But if you're looking at, say, one species of Salmonella, it's great. It's wonderful. If you're looking at all variations of species of Salmonella and you're trying to get a colony count for them from it, it's a little different. So now you expand that to coliforms, which is Klebsiella, Salmonella, E. coli, Proteus, all these other things that get thrown in there. Yes, you can kind of do it, but not only is it make it more difficult, you're also throwing in an enrichment, which if you're not absolutely 100%, and even then, if you are, you're letting it grow for an hour in broth or in some kind of happy media, because you want to get it happy so it doesn't just die on you and explode and kill all the DNA in it. So your numbers are going to be wrong no matter what.
So just explain to for just a real quick explanation about Qpcr. Essentially, you're taking a sample, you're growing it to a certain degree, then you're pureeing it all up, and then you take a look at all the DNA samples that you find inside that puree in order to identify the different things that are there. Your point about doesn't distinguish between live and dead means any dead thing still has DNA that could be detectable by the Qpcr. Mm-hmm. And of course, it only looks for the strands of DNA that you tell it to look for, which is one of the reasons why plate testing is so much more superior. With the plate testing, there's a human being involved that actually takes the plate, looks at it, and identifies things that they find on it. And,
I like this. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. I was going to say,
gosh, you're the expert. I'm just filling in the blank for those people who may not understand.
I like to say PCR or Qpcr is a DNA photocopier. Mm-hmm. If it's there, you will make lots and lots and lots and lots and exponential numbers of copies. Spartan Drone, seeing your comment. Yes, Medicinal Genomics has written lots of articles. I have read all of them repeatedly. They are calling us constantly to buy their kits. I believe they just got their AOAC approval for total coliforms. I still don't buy it, as I still do not believe it's as sensitive. If you really want to be more sensitive, you would be going for a total enumeration or something of that nature. Yes, you can. It is doable. I'm not saying it's not doable, because there's a lot of exceptions in micro. But from what I have reviewed of their system personally, with my background that I have done a lot of Qpcr design, like I said, I've got a patent on this on my own that I built for bacterial diagnostics. So yes, it's doable. The problem is that it is not as cut and dry as they like to make it. They're trying to sell. They also, didn't do a great job of not pissing off all of the labs and now CRA when they came in. They just tried to railroad things. Plating is the gold standard and has been since the Victorian times.
So if somebody were a company that regularly remediated before testing the first time, the plate testing is desirable to them because the microbial stuff is dead. But if they did the Qpcr, they would still pick up on the whatever was killed. Okay.
Flip it. If it's live, you're going to find it. The plates will get it.
Right.
Within reason. If you might get more stuff if it's dead, depending. Sometimes there's things you can add to treat it to kill off the DNA before you go. If you really wanted to be safe, you would take an RNA, you'd make cDNA from it, because the RNA, and then, during the RNA original step, you'd kill off all the DNA. It's a little more complicated, and working with RNA, well, in grad school, we used to set it aside on its own separate bench, away from everybody, and if anybody walked near it, you'd shoot them, because it was the only way you'd be sure that they didn't contaminate your bench top.
Josh, let me just say this. One of the problems is that in Michigan, it's not is it there or is it not there question. Sometimes it's a question of quantity. And that's really the distinction that's difficult for the PCR and the Qpcr methodology to accomplish. It can tell you that something is present. It just can't tell you in what quantity. And that's really a trigger for a lot of the standards we have. You're allowed a certain level of microbials, but you can't dictate what that level is based on that testing.
Which is why they use the Qpcr now for STEC, which is your E. coli 0157H7.
Which is a yes or no. It's a yes or no test, right?
And it's a lot easier to pick out. Plus, it's also you're looking at one serotype, usually, or one section. It's that Qpcr is wonderful for. Clinics still use plating for things. If it's more in a train, and the problem is, though, that you do need somebody trained to use it, and you do have to keep your incubators at the right temperatures, and you do have to know at least what you're looking at.
And maybe you have to keep records of how long you keep stuff in the incubators, maybe. I've
asked other representatives of labs who have been on here, if at around the same time that there was an investigation launched into Viridis, and the inspectors came into the Michigan local lab and asked for records pertaining to what temperatures tests were run at, would they be able to have been provided to them?
They should have. That's part of your ISO.
Okay. I've asked every other lab that. Viridis said that they didn't realize that they should have
it's part of
that on hand.
It's part of your ISO. You should have those logs available. They should be checked. If anything goes outside of those temperature, usually it's 3 degrees, plus or minus.
Could the temperature being not correct result in in clearing? Like making the results be a clear microbial.
Sure. Absolutely. So yeast and mold like
flour, right?
Yeast and mold like 70 degrees. They like room temperature, ballpark. 25 degrees C, which is ballpark 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Coliforms, they tend to like body temperature. So 37 C, 95, 98 degrees Fahrenheit. If you go colder than that, your coliforms will grow slower. If you go hotter than that, they tend to die off. With the yeast and mold, you've got a little bit wider range, but colder, it will slow them down. Hotter, usually once you get to a certain point, it will kill them off. So, yes, if you're falling outside those ranges, so those are usually pretty safe ranges. But, if you get too far out of those, you're going to have issues, and they are they're out of the accreditation parameters, so to speak.
How do we stand? I'm sorry, Rick, go ahead. I'll say, what's the answer here? How do we standardize this? How do we make sure that going on in the future that people are not able to do what is going on here?
So the problem, there's a lot of ways you can skin the cat, right? So I'm on the AOAC and the ASTM committees to help standardize the lab methods. Like I'm on those committees to kind of go through and say, here's your bare minimum standards you have to hit to have this test. So really what goes on is you can do a test a lot of ways. You can use a lot of different equipment. So for example, if you are doing pesticides, you don't have to do it on an LC-MS. You don't have to do it on a GC-MS. You can use an LC-QTOF. You can use an HPLC for some. I mean, you can use all of these different methods. Same thing with, and the microbials. You can do total enumeration, which is you would put it into a little card, grow it up on media, and because you know what's going into it initially, roughly based on their protocols, they will then count it in a nice little computerized cell window. They'll go through and they count it for you. It basically becomes a trained monkey kind of thing. You can do plating, which is you're literally just counting colony forming units. But what you absolutely have to do is you have to validate it and get that validation approved. So like AOAC, they give you the validation minimum standards. And in order for you to do that test, you have to prove you meet those minimum standards. And it's selectivity, specificity, reproducibility, intraperson, and other lab techs on different days. You have to do selectivity, which makes sure you're not picking up anything else differently. I mean, there's a whole list of things that you have to prove when you send these in this packet. I just had to do a whole lot of these because Abko's. I'm now just waiting on the CRA to finish reviewing all of our stuff so that we can do our edibles and our concentrates. So, we just started bringing those online, and it's an involved process. But if you have the background, you know what you're doing. You should be able to do this, and you should be able to supply this because that'll tell you your limit of quantitation, which is how low you can go, and the results be validated. So like you should never really get a negative from a lab test. It should be not detected because there might be something there. It's just your instrument's not sensitive. Your test isn't sensitive to get it. So if
have you seen lab results with negative numbers on them? That seems
sorry, with zero. I mean, it should never be a zero.
Right.
Granted, Confident Cannabis has issues and like
you could never be sure
put that on there.
Right.
Yeah. It's just you can't prove a negative, right? That's the big problem. You can say not detected, but then you have your limit of detection, which is I can see something, I can see that it's there, but my assay is sensitive enough that I can't reliably tell you that number, what that number is. So there's that little gray area range between quantitation and detection. And then you go and based off of your range, how you dilute it. So, if you're looking at a range of between 10% and 50%, for example, if your sample comes in any higher or lower than that, you've either got to dilute it or do it find another way or not extract it as much or in a different volume to get a usable amount and a usable reading. So I think everything has been kind of like they're doing all the things. It's a brand new industry, which the people that matter, or at least the people that are trying to help, I guess, are working on it. It's just those committees take time. I mean, they're usually once a week. They're all volunteer. And when you get a bunch of scientists quibbling about how low or what limits or what compound you need to add into something, it's mind-numbingly boring and it takes forever, especially if somebody works somewhere on one thing and they really have a bug up their ass for this one chemical and they absolutely are going to prove that it has to be on that list and no one else cares about it. It happens all the time and they fight about it. So it takes months, and that's just to get the standards out, and then it's got to go out and be voted on. So they're getting there, but really none of this actually gets put into hard effect until the FDA steps in. I mean, really, when it comes down to it, that's going to be the big thing that really pushes finally to standardize things.
We've talked to some people on the show, some labs who suggested getting efficiency out of reporting what the parts per whatever unit, of microbial activity there are, but not necessarily having a pass or fail for it, just offering the information to the consumer.
Well, so I will say I'll throw out my clinical micro take on this. If your pot's growing outside, it's going to have yeast and mold on it. Yeast and mold's everywhere.
Microbials too.
It's going to have all the other stuff on it, but really, if you're looking at coliforms and you're looking at yeast and mold, you're going to get yeast and mold if it's growing outside. You're going to have some other stuff. Total aerobic is a complete waste of time test. If anybody ever suggests this, all it says is you've got microbes there. It doesn't tell you what kind. It doesn't tell you anything about it. It just tells you have normal everyday microbes there. It really, to me, is worthless. But for people that are using this in a medical fashion, like if this is medicine, cancer patients, that kind of thing, those people are immune compromised. Not all fungal spores, especially if you vape, if you're using one of those flower vaporizers, not all of those get hot enough to kill off fungal spores. One of the leading causes of death of most people that are immune compromised has nothing to do with the disease that they're actually in there for. It's a secondary infection, yeast. It's a secondary fungal infection. So now you have those people that are taking yeast, fungal spores directly into their lungs, and that's the leading cause of death for immune compromised people. So I think yeast and mold is one of those things that, do they have the number correct? I don't know that. I honestly, I do not know, because no one's done the studies. No one's done the clinical checks. But I would personally err on the side of caution with that myself, because if I ever found out somebody died from smoking my pot,
would it kill you?
I don't know if I could live with myself for that one. So, coliforms, that's a whole nother thing. And to be honest, I think that's when the FDA steps in. They're forced to, once we get a foodborne outbreak from some shoddy product, whether it's an edible or an oil or whatever. We're not even looking at anaerobic bacteria. That's a whole nother thing. That's, all this oil that's sitting on the shelves and not mixing, not getting oxygen is there's a decent chance C. diff could be potentially there, but no one knows because we've never looked at it and it's not even a thing.
We don't have a shelf life established either for some of these products, Josh. Isn't that a real concern of yours?
Yes, actually. So anybody who's talked to me about after a drink or two and has gotten on the subject of, what happens with, what do I think about federalization? It's needed, but it is going to be a huge shakeup for a few reasons. Number one is now you can ship stuff over state lines, and that's going to make things very interesting with the consolidation of the industry.
Hey, I just want to jump in just for a second because we're gonna bring in Jeff and Jenny from Beachgrass Events, and we're going to talk a little bit later on about some events they have coming up. But just to hang out and be part of the discussion, we're continue on labs for a while, though. As long as you're up for it, I've been really enjoying this and getting a lot of really good information out of it. Please continue on.
So I'm just actually, Jonathan, I'm not saying they died from weed. I'm saying if they died from a fungal infection from contaminated weed. No, they have not yet. I've never heard of it, and I'm not saying they died from weed. So
yeah, I think he's kind of confused. He's confused. He didn't.
The statement that you said, I can understand where someone would draw that conclusion, but clearly, I think we're all on the same page here. We're all of the mind that cannabis is not a lethal substance.
Correct.
And it is.
I'm a proponent of it.
Yeah, it is right to talk about, Aspergillus, which is not cannabis, but it's an infection that has killed at least one person associated with cannabis exposure in California. Cass Coleman has educated me and I think Jamie on that same subject. So we're familiar with at least that one.
Not that if that were confirmed that the ratio would be significant enough to want to cause too much issue. But so your perspective is more out of caution, like
yes.
If it ever did happen, I wouldn't want to be the one that it happened
Correct.
to.
Yeah, I'm not not saying that it's because of the weed that they died from,
or got sick from. I mean, we're saying died, but clearly illness, or anything. I mean, I know anytime you produce something and someone has a bad reaction to it, if you're a human, you feel bad about that.
And cannabis is not without its. Hey, look, there is good science on cardiac related events and blood pressure related issues, and so let's not we got to be realistic here. We say no one's ever died from it. It indicates that there's no potential health issues that can be derived from usage of cannabis, which that's bullshit. That's not true. It's not likely, but there has been research showing, cardiac events and other things. So it's just something to be mindful of.
It's been the trigger sometimes, as many things could be the trigger sometimes for somebody with a heart condition.
Yes.
Still not. I mean, I'm not sure if I'm blaming cannabis necessarily in that instance either. That person has a vulnerability to being, set off to something that pushes it, whether it was cannabis or not.
Yeah. So, sorry to get sidetracked.
I'm glad you clarified that, and clearly the chat needed it clarified. I'm glad you did. Thank you very much.
Okay. So, but with FDA comes a lot stricter standards on everything. So if I'm sure there will be a lower end, like a small business carve out. There usually is, but you're going to be looking at GMP manufacturing standards or ISO 9001 minimum for a lot of these places. You're going to be looking at full food, but then you're going to have to begin doing batch testing, like full beginning, middle, and end of lot batch testing. You're going to have to do expiration testing, date testing, which is stability testing. That goes for, and that's for every SKU you put out. That's not just for, I have this list of gummies. It's you have a yellow gummy, if you have a red gummy, if you've got a green gummy, they're all got to go in and get stability tested. Then you're also, from the microbial side, most consumer packaged goods get tested for about a panel of roughly 10 to 15 things, 10 to 15 organisms. So just looking at E. coli, salmonella, and coliforms is really light compared to what just about every other major industry goes through. So start budgeting for a little higher lab testing costs once that kicks through.
It's interesting. I keep on hearing about how overly restrictive it is and how we need to ease up on it and that type of stuff.
I would say, a lot of this thing is, do we really need to look at some of these? This is the big problem with cannabis as a whole, because it's a newer industry. It's just, we were blacklisted for a century from doing any testing on it, from doing anything. You might have one region of the US that you should be looking at one fungal potential infection and nowhere else, because a lot of that is very region specific. Like, Wisconsin blastomyces is a big thing, but it only seems to be in the northern Michigan and northern Wisconsin for some whatever reason. Do we really need to worry about some bacteria that are on there? I don't know, because no one's been able to test it. And hell, the DEA even though the Supreme Court has smacked them down like 10 times already, refuses to allow, universities and hospitals and clinics to actually do any of this work.
Josh, you make a huge point, and I'm going to use this as an example. Right now, we had $40 million set aside for veteran research in post-traumatic stress disorder with the use of cannabis, right? And what our law states in MiNORML that you had to have, in order to use this money, they have to be clinical trials approved by the FDA. That's what MiNORML says in order for these funds to be expended. And what you're seeing here is there were a couple articles released over the last couple of days. All these, I'll say 2 universities who were awarded money are circumnavigating the FDA, right? They're not going through the clinical trial process the way it was meant to be. We're doing observational studies, and that seems to be the way that we're trying to skirt around the FDA, because the FDA doesn't deal with observational studies, especially with Schedule 1 drugs, right? So when you bring up a really good point, because this isn't just a lab testing issue, this is a research issue that is cannabis wide, and it's a major issue, and it's a big barrier, and it's a big problem.
Well, and like what doses should you be getting for certain things? Like you can't do those dosing experiments because you'll come in and you get shut down and busted by the DEA. I mean,
and
what is a good dose?
How reliable is self-reported data? I mean,
yeah.
when you're talking about
if there even is a dosing regimen that should be discovered, whereas we know that like at least when you're talking about a whole spectrum plant, those components working synergistically, and then the person's unique system determines the amounts.
Well, and then when you throw in too, like especially for these people that are smoking flower, the absorption efficiency is going to be different for every person. It's going to be different based on the cannabis you're smoking, and also too with all the lab shopping, how do you even know that weed is right? The thing that I love, I want to, when people talk about even just Michigan, when we go to sample for THC, what we're getting is the average of that entire batch. We have to take 0.5% of that entire batch. So popcorn, nice, supreme, wonderful nuggets, everything.
So wait a second. To be clear, a batch could be up to 50 pounds potentially.
Up to 50 pounds.
And somebody takes samples from around the 50 pounds.
I have to take a representative sample of that entire 50 pounds. So if that 50 pounds is 10% popcorn nuggets, I have to, of that 0.5% that I pull out, I have 10% of that should be popcorn nuggets. And then we have to.
Testing labs can cheat, though, Josh. Isn't that true? They can.
Yes, it is.
So they only take the ones that are sparkly and glistening with all those lovely THC nodules, and then ignore the popcorn buds at the bottom that you're talking about.
Yep. You also have a lot. You can sprinkle the dust and the keef on top of what they're going to be sampled. So proper sample selection is huge. But that's when you go back to dosing and all those things. Like, how do you know until you can actually get those clinical trials and actually get the dosing right? Literally, we don't know anything. It's just throwing a dart at the wall, and we're getting close. We might be hitting the same country, but we're not even sure if we're on the same continent.
Yeah. Christiana mentions just sampling directly off the top instead of reaching down to the whole thing. I imagine what it's supposed to be like is sort of like Dr. Pol with one of those really long gloves where he reaches inside the cow to get the calf, right? And when you're doing
the fistula gloves,
that's how it should be, all the way down at the bottom of the back.
So the way we're actually supposed to do this is and also too with the last updates to lab sampling, the CRA has actually offloaded some of this to us. Is that as a lab, when we walk into a place, if you have your 50 pounds, we're supposed to weigh the whole thing. We're supposed to check the whole thing from you. And if it's not the whole 50 pounds, or if it's not within a certain percentage of, matching your numbers, we're supposed to walk. Now, most people just look at it. Does this look like 50 pounds on the shelves? Yes. But if we do not have access to the whole thing, we're supposed to walk. Now, when you open up a bag, you should be mixing up that entire bag. You should then be pulling from multiple bags, and you should be trying to get, like I said, a representative sample. Now, if you're a grower, if I were a grower, out west they do this, and especially in the states where you have, like Nevada or Pennsylvania, where it's 5-10 pounds maximum batch size, they sub-batch. They'll take their premium, they'll do premium grade A, garbage, offshoots, whatever, and they will pre-sort everything and they will break that out into how they actually sell and their projections for the year based on they expect to get out of every grow setup. They expect, every room, 30% of their profits are going to be premium. Everything else is going to be grade A. And then the bottom stuff, they're going to send into their own vertically integrated in-house processing and distribution distillation setup or whatever, so they can make their edibles or concentrates and whatever. Here in Michigan, everyone's just pushing that 500 or that 50-pound batch max. Well, everybody's business is different. I would look at it like, well, Okay, an extra. Most people never get the full list for tests. I mean, an average test list for, I think, for everybody is between $470, $450, and $500 ballpark around the state. Maybe a little higher, maybe a little lower. Most people are not paying $500 for a test. So you're looking at an extra $450 to get anywhere between 1 and 8 to 10% more on your yield. I would pay an extra test to sub-batch because you don't need to do anything. All you need to do is just go into metric and split it. You can voluntarily sub-batch as much as you want, but it's a little more work and it's a little money up front. But, it gives all of those smaller mom and pop shops, you no longer have to go out and specifically buy up or segregate an entire grow room just for your edibles, for making your concentrates, making your whatever. You actually can take that one batch that you have, separate off all the good stuff. And because you don't have to do testing on it if it's internal, if you're just moving from your own internal processes, you can just take that good stuff, set it off, get that tested, run it through your normal process, then take the internal stuff up, and all of a sudden you can go get it distilled and make actual products. And you can actually get more SKUs out there. You can get more and compete a little better. I would be running it, but again, I'm from a lab. And I don't.
Josh, did you see Joe Sullivan's question that he just asked?
No.
Does a smaller batch size equal necessarily a more accurate?
Not necessarily, as long as you're doing a representative sample. Now, I think it's easier with a smaller sample size or with a smaller batch size. I'm saying, so for example, if you have, most other industries, steak, vegetables, whatever, you've got premium, like for steak, you've got premium grade A, you've got grade D, whatever. I think. Is that the right ones? Angus, USDA certified, like whatever the settings are.
Yummy, less yummy.
Angus.
Yeah,
Yep. So say, for example, your premium flour, you've got, out of a 50-pound batch, you've got 10 pounds of that's your premium flour. You're pushing 35% for that flour on average, 30 to 35%, somewhere in there for your top grade bud. Anything over 30% is I would be a little leery. I've seen a few that are consistently over that, but the CRA audits, at least for our lab, anything over 27%, we get audited on every time.
Point 3 of every 1,000 tests.
Literally any THC test, any potency test that we have that tests over 27% THC, we get audited on and have to redo. And
Jamie's saying that's just a small fraction of the number of tests that you do. You very seldom run across that number, right, Josh?
Well, it depends on where you're at. It's supposed to be more seldom. We do have somebody that comes in consistently over 30%, and it's automatic at our lab that as soon as his stuff comes in, we prep the rerun right after it because we know it's coming. But anything over 45%, I would be extremely skeptical, going to outright bullshit. But because you're saying 40 to 50% of that entire plant mass is THC. So no water, no chlorophyll, no cell walls, no anything. You're saying 50% of, that'd be like saying 50% of you is THC.
Yeah. Although sometimes I feel that way. It doesn't seem realistic. Josh, you mentioned that anything over 27% you get audited. What that really means is that you're a mandatory retest. That's the definition of audit then, correct? So
the CRA will reach out to us and say, you must rerun and retest and re-report results along with all of the graphs and everything, chromatograms and our numbers for this metric tag. And it's literally anything over 27%.
So that's what constitutes an audit, which is just a second more in-depth look because the THC number was provocative and we wanted to make sure. And if that's at 27 and we're seeing numbers 40,
45.
Those should be audited every single time.
But beyond an audit, from a common sense perspective, and by the way, we've had other labs on here that have talked about from a national perspective that other labs in other states are not seeing 40 to 45%. So it's an extremely unique Michigan phenomena tied to just a single lab.
I will say I'm good friends with a colleague in California, and everybody knows it does come up there occasionally, but everybody knows it's complete BS out there. But that California has its own interesting issues and problems to go along with all of it. But so like with the batches, like, so I guess what I'm saying is, and these are just rough estimates. This is not even, I mean, this is just for ease. You've got 10% of that top tier grade that's say 30 to 35%. You've got probably going to be more. So you're looking at probably 20 pounds of something that's between 20 and 30%, say 25. And then you've got the bottom remainder, which is your lower end, your 20% and under, 15% and under. Depending on the way prices are going, let's face it, at least from everybody that I've talked to that we've, you know, when we go out and collect stuff, if it's less than 15%, you're not even going to bother. You can't even sell it for the most part, right? Is what I've been hearing.
Then
there's an unfortunate catch-22 there, as you kind of started off this conversation by pointing to the consumers.
Some really great cannabis at 17%. Yeah.
There's stuff at 9% that'll kick your ass all over the place.
The fun part is
that
the few studies
that you don't get much benefit or effect from.
Yeah, well, the fun part about it all is like there's been a few actual studies, some of the ones that I've read, where 16 to 18%, your receptors max out. You just get there faster.
So I was going to bring that up. You bring up that saturation thing, and I didn't realize that you were pointing to something that had like a percentage that was utilized as the basis for it. I'm not sure if that came from, like, that's what they use from the lot of cannabis they use for that study, or what that's from. But there was a study that came out of Colorado, June of 2021, and because when you talk about the saturation thing, I've always like kind of I don't want to say known, but assumed that you only get so high, and just kind of doing it more just out of continued exercise of it for whatever reason. And so it concluded a couple of things: that there's saturation rate, and that the percentage of cannabis on flower and concentrates did not track necessarily with how high, so to speak, the users got.
And there's a lot of, they got to redo the studies because, I mean, they only did a real rough one. I mean, it's only been once, and I'm sure that was hard enough to get done. But, most everybody, it comes back to that whole, your flavors and your terpenes. I mean, let's face it.
Your individual system, too.
Yeah. I mean, some people just don't get as high.
But if you're using that crap out of the University of Mississippi, then you absolutely are not getting a representative sample of anything that's going on. I mean, the Beachgrass folks, I'm sure, are used to something a little bit more refined than just that stems and seeds ground up and sent to patients kind of a thing.
I mean, I'll say I want that wine. Sorry, I did mean to jump in. I was just going to say I want the full flavor. I want the difference. I want my full limonene, or I'm not a sour diesel guy, but that's what I want to look at. I wanted a good experience. Of course, I'm also getting the part where I don't want to be bricking myself into a couch anymore.
Well, that's the question, we need to educate people. When you say like 17 to whatever percent lower THC percentage, the question should be, well, what's the terpene content? I mean, if you tell me it's 3% plus, I mean, that's you know what I mean? Like, okay, now we have more information.
Or the standard test has that list. I mean, the predominant terpenes, at the very least, if not
the ratio.
10 or 15 things down,
But it's more using because if you were to talk to somebody out on the street, what does beta myrcene mean to them?
Nothing.
It's got a peppery finish to it. What's limonene? Okay, that one they might get because lemon, but citrus. But a lot of the things. It's the consumer's not educated. We need to do more to kind of bring them in. I mean,
well, there's the catch-22. Yeah, there's the feeding into the market because there's the immediate gratification, and there's taking the time to attempt to educate people to not have to be so consumed with that issue.
Which we're actually hoping we can do with our terpene test. It's 38 terpenes. We're piloting a new test interpretation, I guess you could say, but it actually gives you that so you can put it on your product so you can sell. So like if you're limonene and pinene heavy, your top two, and then you've got myrcene, and we'll just leave it at that for simplicity. Citrus flavors with a pine undernote and peppery finish, and then you can slap it right on your label. And
but I'm going to say this though: you can't teach people that don't want to learn. And the fact is, the vast majority of consumers out there are perfectly comfortable with their knowledge level of cannabis. They're not really interested in the science. And
but you got to give them a reason.
There's plenty of research out there on YouTube and even a TikTok video or two, I'm sure.
So that's a nuance when you're talking about dealing with caregivers, when you're trying to philosophically, change your approach to this. And certainly, I think for those instances, you don't tell the customer that they're wrong. You don't contradict them, you accommodate them. And then when the opportunity comes to have a conversation with somebody, then maybe you're prepared to do that efficiently.
But I think we as an industry need to give them a reason. I mean, let's face it, we're all stuck on this.
There are things, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, our labs are hurting with the price, the THC inflation, just as much as all the growers are. And, we all need to work together to actually help with that. I mean, the industry isn't going to change until we start trying to do something to it, unless we start bringing it that way.
You have to lead. You have to lead on that, right?
And some things are happening. I mean, there are some places that offer the education. There's some places that have gotten away from using the sativa indica hybrid labels as a basis to try to predict effect, and instead try to use groupings of terpenes or like feedback from all the cultivators and all the people that were involved in that. Sometimes several people. And this is generally what, our group thought about this, some indicator that's a little bit more useful than those labels.
I think terpene content too is, for me anyways, is a great indicator of quality as well, because terpenes are such volatile compounds, right? And I was at my screen, is it 70 degrees, 75 degrees, somewhere in there? It starts to off gas at a very low temperature.
Yeah, most of them are pretty low.
So, I mean, when you have flower that has an elevated high terpene content and that really punches you in the face, I mean, that grower was paying attention to their environment, and that and that's the only way you're going to come to the end product with that type of quality. So I mean, it's really indicative if the consumer wants to be educated. I mean, those terpenes really do tell you a lot about where this product even came from.
Well, it's like that craft winery, that craft brewery thing. I mean, you're always gonna have the high octane, the Miller Lite, the Budweiser, the stuff that's just gonna get you there. And then you're going to have the guys that go through and build a product around, their Terra Noir, their terpenes, all of that other stuff. So I think that's where the industry, if it wants to survive post-federalization, you're going to have to, because Winston-Salem's going to outbeat you.
So I just want to point out that Christiana is saying that Consume Cannabis encourages bud tenders to learn about terpenes and gives them a raise as they go through a two-part class on terpene.
That's the kind of leadership in the industry that we need.
Right on. I dig it.
Yeah. Well, I know we've got our guest here from Beachgrass, Jamie. I'm not sure at what point you want to.
Yeah. So I mean, I thought that it might go over. I kind of estimated 5.10, for this reason, because this.
Yeah, we were really enjoying that conversation, and on the subject of terpenes and THC content, the strongest medicine we ever tested from a THC standpoint for our patients was not one that necessarily does it the most for me. And the one that came back at a 17% was the one that I take to the desert isle with me, So I think a lot of it is education, which is hard to do to the average consumer. I think price point and big numbers are kind of their concern. And so that's kind of part of what we want to do, which can segue into who we are and what we got going on. But I love listening to you about the lab stuff.
Yeah. So let's, Josh, anything you want to include before we kind of wrap up on that? I want to say that Amy Brown watched our last show from Abko Labs in Michigan when we discussed that update from the state with Viridis and stuff like that. And she thought that a broader discussion of what goes on with labs in the state would be a really good idea, and that you do a lot of speaking on the issue all over the place. And I can tell I've really been engaged with your explanation on all these things. It's been really cool. And so that's how we came to get you on here, and really appreciate it. And please, fill in whatever we didn't get to, or make sure you point people to, the lab here too. And you do caregiver testing and stuff like that. And, a lot of people who watch here might be interested in that kind of stuff as well. But
Yeah.
But please, yeah.
Oh, I'll just round out. Just thanks for having me on. I enjoy it's part, getting stuck in a lab. Sometimes you kind of don't see daylight for a while, and it's nice to actually be out and be around with people. But I will say one thing that I think I at least myself I bring to the cannabis industry in Michigan that's a little different is that I started out on the hemp side. With a lab, I opened up a lab to do the same kind of testing, but in Wisconsin, and it covered the hemp side, which is far more concerned with everything but THC. So, they're really big on the entourage effect and the profiles and the ratios of your other cannabinoids, your CBG, your CBD, your CBN, your all of those other things. And I do think that when it comes to the end of the day, and they've had studies that have actually shown that it's more effective with everything. That entourage effect really does bring more to the table, and you don't have to have that pure THC just to get the job done. All of those full spectrum, those broad spectrums, they really bring more to the table, whether it's, potentially with helping somebody with, that's using it medically or just recreationally. I know if you have that full body experience, it definitely, at least my experience, it definitely has more of an effect than just the straight stuff. So, I will end with just saying, if there's any other questions, no obligation whatsoever. If, just give me a call or email me, jsmith@abcolabs.com. Even if you think a COA looks kind of dodgy and you want to get it checked, like I said, I've done it for years. We're all in this industry together, and we all need each other to survive. So
That's really important, like-minded, develop good relationships with like-minded, people and companies. And get through some of these times.
Tell truthful stories about what's really happening so that people can honestly evaluate where they want to spend their money.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for appearing, Josh. And you're welcome, of course, to stay on the show and follow along and contribute as we go along. But if you have to bug out, we know it's a work day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'll stick around. It's ended and we'll have a work day, so.
Right on, man.
Good time.
I appreciate it. So, and of course, Abko does do a wide range of services. Businesses should go there. They want an honest, scientific assessment.
Mm-hmm.
And
we'll also check your facility out for you if you are having yeast and mold problems. Being a microbiologist, I might pick out something that somebody else might not, but I can at least give you a few heads up even if you don't want us to come out.
Right on. That's really good. That's a great service. I've definitely heard of places getting up and running and needing to figure out a lot of stuff to get the conditions, correct. And then, of course, there's a wide range of services for the individual or the caregiver or patient to get some stuff tested too for things they might want to know about. So, anyway, really appreciate it, man. Thanks for hanging around, and feel free to be part of whatever discussion we go to from here.
Absolutely.
So,
thank you,
Jeff and Jenny. Beachgrass Events. I know there is an event coming up later on this month. We'll talk about that in a minute, but just give us a little bit more background on yourselves and how you get to the point where you're involved in putting on a production. And this is a state licensed cannabis event production, and we'll get into the details of that right after.
Yeah, I'm Jeff. This is my wife Jenny. We've been here in Michigan for about 10 years now. We both grew up on the other side of the line in Indiana and lived in Illinois for a while. And I developed the personal need for access to medical cannabis, which still isn't available in Indiana, may never be. And so instead of holding out hope, we jumped the line to where it was available. To jump through some sections of the story, I fell in with an amazing caregiver as a patient for 6 years almost, I think. And as he was moving into the licensed arena, and is it still in the process of doing so, he's opening up a micro business in Buchanan. I felt the need to provide my own medicine, which then led to providing medicine for other folks, which then led to seeing the kind of divergent ideals happening here in Michigan, I guess would be a polite way of putting it. And so not only in like the licensed arena, but we live in New Buffalo, which still doesn't have licensed recreational cannabis. So we live in a weird pocket of the state compared to what's happening in the rest of the state. And so with all those things going on, our proximity to musicians and various things kind of led us to where we are now. So her background is in healthcare as an occupational therapist. My former professional life and sometimes current has been in everything from mortgage banking to real estate. And so we also kind of saw that emerging here in the southwest corner where, ownership of our communities is not really within the community anymore. And so from a licensing perspective here in New Buffalo, it's going to be interesting to see as things roll out, who's going to be involved in these licenses. So you guys were talking about education. I think the easiest way to educate is to celebrate, is my cheesy saying I like to throw out there whenever I can. And so ideally where we started was a competition that was open to both caregivers and licensed facilities, and we worked with the spot laboratories to kind of set up the protocols that would allow those things to happen. As you guys know, they're no longer testing currently, so we shifted more to a music festival with a cannabis focus. And then we're fortunate enough to be working with Green Stem Provisioning as our on-site provider, and they are an awesome company who tries to contribute to the community and does a lot of great things to move the industry forward. Redemption Cannabis is participating as one of our consumption lounge sponsors. And, again, as a mom and pop event organizer who, had what was probably a bad idea one day and landed here 8 or 9 months later. We're very grateful to have the partners we have moving forward with this event from the cannabis side. Trivium Cannabis is also going to participate as one of our consumption area sponsors. And again, kind of came up through the system. Thank you for that. And we'll get to the entertainment in a second, but it is a cannabis festival, so I think we should cover that first. And, so the idea here is to bring folks out in a format where they can talk to the people who are producing the products they're consuming. And, it's an interface that you don't always have when you're in the store purchasing, or those kind of transactional things. An important aspect for us was keeping the focus on Michigan brands that are working here in the state to further the industry, work with their communities, and we've kind of landed there. Luckily, we've been very fortunate to find the partners we have when we started out on this train. Entertainment wise, we call it the Dead Funk Summit.
Hey, was that back on the first one I put up there?
Yeah.
That's fine. I'm sorry. Go back to that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's cool. So our buddy Joe Marcinek, who's the main headliner for the evening, has created this kind of concept of an evolving band. And so he pulls from various musical acts from every genre you can think of, but it started with Melvin Seals from the Jerry Garcia Band and George Porter Jr. from the Meters. So that's where the Dead Funk Summit kind of concept comes from. But for our show, it's a String Cheese, Mo, Dumpster Funk, Particle, horn sections coming out of New Orleans, and they'll be playing a lot of Dead songs, some original mixes, some other stuff from the various artists, and it equates to 2.5 hours of a really good time. Other bands include Steel and the Farm, Mr. Blotto, Midwest Hype, Chester Brown, who just hosted an awesome little festival in Indiana. And so, you know, these guys are all active. A lot of our bands actually include members who are caregivers, and I'm not going to, you know, out who's who and what's what. But it's a really cool aspect for us that these people we've come to know over the last 15, 20 years can now be a part of what we're doing. So, you know, it's very close to home for us on a lot of levels. We have put everything together ourselves. We kind of dropped our lives to do this and see where it lands. And the support from the community has been awesome. We've been, you know, tracking really well with it, and we're really proud of the festival we put together.
We'll put that other one up here too. We can talk about that.
Yeah, and so we're doing it in Hartford, which they've never done anything like this. They, you know, Hartford Speedway is an amazing traditional Michigan dirt track, racing every Friday night, family stuff on Saturdays.
Is that near you guys?
What's that?
Is that near where you guys are?
Yeah, it's about 45 minutes north of us.
So it's extreme, like Southwest Michigan.
We are.
Well, there's been a bunch of events.
Yeah, New Buffalo.
And I think a lot of people from Indiana like to come up and participate in those because of the reasons that you discussed earlier.
There's a little more novelty on that side of the line. And so, yeah, definitely. And our little pocket of the state, like I said, we've kind of been, you know, Three Oaks just had its first dispensary open. That's about 7 miles from us. And then Buchanan and Niles are kind of the centers for the state, but that's still, you know, half hour, 45 minutes away for some people. So immediate access in this corner has been a little bit different than elsewhere and a little bit slower to progress. I mean, I sat in a planning commission meeting where they basically acknowledged that they were supposed to vote on things that haven't been voted on when they opted out. And so they're voting on them now and it's moving forward. But it's just been a weird progression down here. So Tim, the Hartford Speedway and the city of Hartford, you know, they had an open ear to what we're doing. We're being very proactive in the safety, the compliance protocols to make sure that this has a positive effect on the town. And, you know, we want to come back next year is the intent.
Event planning is such a difficult space, and I see
consumption and sales too. That's a tough one to pull off.
Oh yeah.
It's amazing. I don't think people really understand the intricacies that go into an event, right? It sounds very broad, an event, but the holy shit it's really to pull off one of these events is shows skill, right? It shows passion. It shows a lot of different things. So kudos to you guys, because I don't know if I have the attention span to pull one of those off. It's
well,
amazing.
I think that's why it works for me is I don't have a long attention span, and with all the moving facets, I can jump from thing to thing, and Jenny is organized and all the parts I'm not, so it's worked out. It's been nuts. Dealing with the licensing has been nuts. Making sure, you know, all protocols are followed and and measures are met, that's been the difficult part.
Speaking with the licensing, I'm curious, what, from you guys' standpoint, what would you like to see changed to make it easier for you? Because I know I could go through a long list of the stuff that I would love to see on for my stuff, but I don't know anything about the event side of things. What's like streamline it
I can't
wise?
say that it's difficult. It's just making sure. So
What about the municipality?
right. So we ran into municipal override, state override. So from certain things like an insurance perspective, I think there's ways it could be streamlined for us, and for us as we don't have any financial backing, and
So the state wants $100,000 worth of insurance, but some localities require $1 million. Just like it's like an alcohol event.
Exactly.
or something
Exactly.
like that. They model it off their local beer festival or stuff like that.
and we understand the liabilities and all of that, but the different layers create more costs. You know what I mean? Every time there's a layer, there's a cost involved. So from that perspective, it's not terrible, honestly. I think from all of the licenses that are available, it's the most manageable if you know the right pieces to put in place. We are very fortunate where we have an amazing sound engineer. I can't speak highly enough of him. Worked for Tao in Vegas, was a touring sound engineer with Jefferson Airplane, and now has kind of settled into doing smaller festivals with his insane setup. So we are lucky that we had proximity to some of these people who help facilitate those aspects of it. If you don't know those people, then you're making a lot of phone calls, because for every piece of it we didn't have like that, you're through 5 contractors, 2 cancellations, and then you're on the 3rd guy by the time you're settled on where you need to be. In our case, there are legal costs and attorney fees, and so on top of the insurance, and to be expected for doing something like this. But that equates to more money out of the festival and different aspects. So from a budgeting perspective and time perspective, but that's not related to licensing. That's just throwing events. You know what I mean?
What's your estimated attendance? What do you think?
Well, we're hoping for 12 to 1,500 a day. If we can do more than that, that would be phenomenal. If we do that, we're pretty happy.
That's cool.
Kind of similar to similar sized events we've attended, and we're kind of used to attending.
So look at these bands that a lot of the members are from. I kind of like that concept. There used to be this touring band in the jam, like kind of a festival scene called Everybody's Orchestra, and there was different members weave in and out of that and stuff. And I used to have working vacations with this company called Jam Cam at these festivals, and take like legacy video footage of interviews and different things, whatever was set up, with the bands and stuff like that. And it was like a pre-digital or cusp on digital stuff. So it was all analog. They got hand edited and it's DVDs or not, or whatever. Yeah, DVD, I guess, sent out by mail to somebody. And a lot of those bands were at these, festivals consistently, and got to see them a few times and stuff like that.
It was a VHS tape, not a DVD. You're that old. Come on, man.
Yeah. Cassette, yeah.
The real tapers. Yeah. The old taper section.
8-track with the photos, with a glossy photo album.
Yeah, I mean the unique thing is these guys like Jason Hahn from String Cheese Incident. Let's use him as the top example, and I think he's the first name listed there. String Cheese obviously does their thing. They are phenomenal at it. But
they own the Electric Forest Festival here in Michigan.
Yeah,
I believe, right? Yeah.
And so this gives it's kind of a different platform, where you get to play around a little bit and do some different stuff. So it's it's cool. It falls into our concept where it's all kind of direct access to all of these people. And again, we're fortunate to have a friend like Joe who put something like this together and has built it to what it's becoming, you know?
Yeah, very cool. I mean, I think there should be a nice draw just to see the all those great musicians get together and, you know, at least in part give tribute to the dead and stuff. There's a good formula there.
Yeah. What about food trucks though? How are you feeding people? Food trucks? Because I love food trucks.
So thank you. We do have food trucks coming. We're doing varied menu.
Like barbecue, burgers, fries, pizza. There's even vegetarian.
We got one
the gourmet
vegetarian
garden,
option, and then some dessert options.
Yeah, ice cream, donuts, coffee, slushy smoothies.
Yep.
Have all the food groups covered, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Exactly. And being a CRA event and no alcohol sales on site, we're going to try and entertain everybody's taste buds in different ways. We are doing a full non-cannabis vendors market. So I used to kind of hang out on Fish and Widespread Panic lots. And so having like a shakedown street and vendors area was an absolutely integral part of the planning process. So we're going to have some live glass demonstrations going on. We've got some tie-dye artists coming in the more traditional sense. Some nonprofits will be represented in that area as well. And so we're trying to create a platform for as many people as we can, you know, but also keep it to where it will be economically viable for the participants. So, you know, 50 food trucks for 1,200 people doesn't work. So we've kind of worked with people who can keep varied menus, and we'll be releasing all that on our Instagram and Facebook in the build up. So you can check out their personal pages. A lot of them work other festivals and markets around Michigan. We have a guy who does, it's a working booth, and he hand works leather. And so belts, wallets, he told me he had a secret tip. He's got some cannabis stuff he may be coming with and working on, and it's all hand worked like leather that, you know, they do this in front of you. These are just like our growers and you know, our cultivators, our extractors, breeders, that, you know, it's all people who are working with their hands is kind of the concept here.
Right on. I just want to jump in for Dabs. This isn't exactly correct. The voters rejected banning rec licenses, so they still have to go through the process of creating policy for it, either by the council themselves or by ballot.
Yeah, the township had previously approved them, and then this is a measure to rescind them. So it's one of those crazy ones where when you said no, it was actually a yes to cannabis, and those are very confusing. I also
and of course, Dabs, you know, could very well have been, you know, communicating effectively because very aware here of exactly what you're talking about right there.
He exactly knew what we were talking about. Dabs is on top of it. I read about a second community. I want to say maybe Oxford, something like that just on this primary also just did a positive vote of the people for cannabis businesses in their community. So
the area you guys are operating in is traditionally very conservative on this issue, and as you know, over the years, we talked about Oakland County in the beginning of the show being horrible, and there's been some very well noted horrible counties, so to speak, you know, as far as enforcement goes on the west side of the state in some of those places. But now there's been some activity for a while. I mean, out in the open activity, let's say, more than the
There's a dispensary in Hartford. There's actually a licensed cannabis facility was basically on the grounds of the Hartford Speedway, and from my understanding, there were some pre-approved Class C grow licenses approved because it's on 40 acres, so you can sub-parcel it off in various ways. So there was an openness to cannabis in the community, and you know, when we went to the city council and the final vote happened, it was 3 no's to 4 yeses. So we were essentially whatever dollar amount into this thing at that point, and still could have had it pulled out from under us.
It's happened. Hazel Park,
Yeah.
it happened to some people.
And we saw it happen, which is why we were very tight on releasing information. And obviously promotion of an event is 85% of what we need to do. And so it cuts those timelines. Now, we started late in the game. I mean, had we started a year ago, we would have had, but it's not something you can move quickly on. Once the idea was incepted, it's not like you're selling tickets 2 weeks from now. It's you got to sell the concept to a place. And weirdly, a lot of the large places we had, Harb was probably the 6th track I had talked to in the state. We looked at the private property and land use and trying to do things that way, and it didn't make sense from a license perspective. We wanted a public venue, and so dirt track or race tracks in general tend to be a place because you can still like smoke cigarettes in the stands there a lot. And so from a consumption perspective, it was like, we're kind of already there. Let's just make it cannabis, not tobacco. And instead of beer, it'll be some dabs and edibles. And so, I'm a non-drinker. There are beer and wine fests all over Southwest Michigan. There are, I live in a town of 1,500 people with 6 bars. My best buddy runs a brewery here, and I'm all for it. They're doing good things, some of them, but this weird notion of crossing the line to cannabis has really been weird in this pocket of the state. So they were really cool about it. Honestly, it wasn't as much of a battle as we prepared for. And
still a slim vote, but that's that's cool.
Yeah. Well, you would have liked a few yeses quickly and been ready to go. And so, but the bottom line is they were supportive of what we were doing because of the preparations we had made.
That's cool. And that the whole event scene, like a lot's gone down there. I mean, in that area, it got started off a little bit slower, and those people had to go through all the original hoops and stuff. I was involved with the group. They did a great job. I worked with MiNORML and his staff and put on Canna Jam in Ypsilanti. And I've been through that process from that angle, just, from that participatory thing, not spearheading it. I mean, the staff of MiNORML did the heavy work, really. But I saw the process and know how difficult it was. Now it's been a little bit, streamlined. People have gone through it a few times, but it had to get up and running. But I'm sure like the ability to demonstrate, how this works and how popular it is and how it generates for things and doesn't cause any issues and all that kind of stuff has got to be catching on, over there. And even in that really conservative, area traditionally enforcing on minor cannabis activity, and even some that's was legal under the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act, as was unfortunately the case around the state. So that's cool, and I'm glad you're participating in that. That sounds like a really cool approach too.
Yeah, well, we hope all you guys can make it. We invite everyone from the community and just reach out, and we'd love to see as many people there. We wouldn't be here doing a lot of the things we're doing without some of the people on this screen. So we just appreciate the fact we can do this. So whatever hurdles and obstacles are in place are all surmountable. And so it's pretty rad that we can host these kind of events. And the more of them that happen, the more normalized it gets. And ideally we'd like to see cultivator fests that are smaller level events within communities, and maybe some of the smaller dispensaries and businesses that are in these places to do things like this. And we have some great natural landscapes down here in Southwest Michigan that should be utilized for us and the folks who live here. You know what I mean? So, dirt track in Michigan is very Michigan. We love it. You know, like I said, I got to throw my kids in the back of a monster truck a few weeks ago and sit there with them as we cruised around the track, and that was pretty cool. So, but more importantly, they get like a couple thousand people from the surrounding communities who show up there every Friday and Saturday night when they do Saturday night events, and that's what's important to us. You know, gathering places are good, community events are good. It's an easy platform for not only education, but to have a little fun together.
Right. And is there going to be an area provided for nonprofits to participate?
We are. So
Absolutely.
in the non-cannabis vendors market, you know, we are, and we're still kind of compiling our list, which, like I said, we'll release on all our Instagram and Facebook, because I don't have it sitting here in front of me and I don't want to misquote it.
Oh man,
Uh-oh.
must be a very confidential list because
Well said.
he almost broke.
It sounds like a lot of fun. They're putting a lot of work into it. They're making headway in their community. They're changing the stigma, and I believe they're on the path to success. They certainly seem to have the right head about them going about one of these events, because it is intricate, and you can't half-ass a cannabis event in 2022. Not only will your event be a failure, but you'll also damage everybody else's chance of having an event later on. It's irresponsible to not do it properly. It sure seems like they've got a good idea on their radar here.
You get one bite at that apple, right? If it doesn't work out on the first shot, there's not going to be another bite.
Well, if a city like Lansing, which is going to have the Smokers Ball, and Adato Park has had several different events, you know, one screw up there is not really going to affect Lansing's participation, but a new place, Hartford or something, like, come on, man, that's a place where they're really putting a lot of trust into that management team, and they have to deliver.
Well,
So
they were smart picking. They were smart picking the dirt track too. I mean, you get something that people are already going to and it's already part of what they do every week or every
Destination
month.
location.
Yep.
Right.
Parking lot's big enough.
Hey, cool. This weekend we get to smoke cannabis while we're walking around the track.
Auto City Speedway for years and years was the High Times Cannabis Cup destination location for exactly that reason, and it was wonderful. And
Good times.
First
Still
time they
gets rented out
suggested
for
it was
those
like,
events.
Auto City, really? But then when you start to look at all the advantages, concession stands already there, restrooms are already there, all it's all set up for huge crowds. So it was a perfect match.
So I think Mel and Nancy deserve a lot of credit. They're a duo that has put on a lot of these productions, and they've been through some thin and thick times. A lot of the first type of go around, and had to deal with all the smoothing out of the process and all that kind of stuff. And it took a little bit to get going, but they've got some really cool stuff lined up now. And they're involved in some cool productions. Now, obviously, the Sparrows did a good job of putting on Cannabis. Drew, I mean,
Wildly
good
successful.
location, and just a lot of locals came out, which I thought was pretty cool, or at least from the sample of people around us at times. People just wanted to go check it out right there. I thought that was really cool.
Although it's not a consumption event, we'll be at the Michigan Cannabis Industry Association Summer Annual starting tomorrow. Ooh. So there we are. They're back again. Hey, Jeff.
Yeah, sorry. One of the kids reset the router upstairs. My apologies. Yeah, Jenny's staying up there for a minute.
Couldn't figure out why the game was lagging, and then they realized it's good.
You know it. Yes. So Jenny says thank you, and we appreciated coming on here. So I'm gonna hang out, but she's out for now.
Well, that's cool. Well, I'm glad she was with us for a little while, but yeah, I'm glad you came back on. We wondered what happened, but I don't know if you were in the middle of finishing
nonprofits. So we are working with a few nonprofits at this point, and basically we anybody who would like to participate and are approved, charitable organizations and kind of fit the bill. we will have space for them in our non-cannabis vendors market. And, you know, I think, again, there are some relevant causes to what we're doing. So we will be sharing more information about each of our partners as we're leading up to it. You know, it's not only about music. We want people to get a little bit of a message too while they're there.
That's about community. I mean, really, every cannabis festival I've ever been to has been about community. You have the cops I've never run across a pissed off cop at a cannabis festival. You have the vendors, you have the advocates, you have the nonprofits, you have all these different people who come together. The mayor may be out there, and never once have I ever gotten a bad vibe, right? So really, when we talk about it, it's about community. It's a community event where we're consuming cannabis, really.
I wrote on the Social Revolution a couple of years ago when we visited at one of the High Times Cannabis Cup events, and I interviewed the ambulance crew there, and they said, "This is easy money." That's why I titled it "Easy Money." This is easy money. We don't have to do anything. At a booze event, we'd have a dozen runs already, and there'd be, you know, our ambulance would already be full. They're like, you know, we're you know, practically walking around getting autographs. So. You know, that's a perfect thing to say about our events, that the ambulance guys are bored. That's beautiful.
The insurance agents too. I mean, not that they give you a discount because of it, but they are pretty happy when you say you're not serving booze. And so,
Actually, it is less expensive when there's no alcohol involved. If you added it to the mix, I mean, you can't legally under the state law for a cannabis event.
right.
If you added it, it would not be the same cost.
Yeah, they're pretty happy with it just being a cannabis fest, and so
Right.
that was kind of it's a good point, you know.
No, I remember that when those discussions took place during the course of Canada Jam and having to find the right place and dealing with the local $1 million requirement versus the state $100,000 requirement, and you know all that kind of stuff that you were describing.
You know, and I can tell you from attending, you know, dozens of cannabis events all over the place in several states, you're not missing anything without having the booze there. You're not.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, sometimes you see people walking through with a flask, or they have a mysterious pineapple shaped cup there that with a little umbrella. You kind of think they brought that from their car. But, you know, when it comes down to stuff like that, everybody still has a great time, and it doesn't have to have the whole alcohol element. I don't miss it.
I don't miss it, that's for sure.
We've got a nice thing going here with cannabis events in Michigan, and I just hope we keep seeing more of them. And you know, it's like I said, we're kind of fortunate that we're in a position where we can be doing these things and gathering as a community to celebrate and get around what we love. You know,
That's the truth.
mm-hmm.
You know, when you love it, you respect it, I think. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my thought. I see a lot of really responsible people at cannabis events, and I see when someone is screwing up or doing something crazy, I see people kind of let them know. You know, we self-police our own to a certain degree. So don't drink and drive, smoke and fly. I don't drive, smoke and fly all at the same time. But
You know, all these events, and of course these license events by the state are the most like directly interactive with local authority and you know and all that kind of stuff. But all of them continue to demonstrate, you know, cannabis is something to not have these major concerns or extra restrictions and you know shit about. And they help to normalize, you know, cannabis over time. So the more of it, the better. You know, and this is a cool concept. You know, people. I mean, I guess a lot of the discussion, probably around a lot of these events, and perhaps yours, and definitely Canada Jam, was to have a show or an event with various components. You know, with the entertainment and so forth, that somebody would go to anyway. You know, and pay like X amount to attend, regardless of anything else. Just a big, you know, production being put on in that location, and you know, in this case, because of the extra licensing and the special events licensing, you can have cannabis available there for sale and to use.
a cannabis friendly event is far more popular than the cannabis not friendly events.
Like I said, we're just fortunate we can do these two things. Cannabis has been very good to me. It's kind of put me in my life where I am today, and I don't mean that lightly. As a patient, it was a very transformative thing. And I started smoking young, so I didn't use it medicinally for, you know, a good chunk of my life, and then took a step away from it and came back to it with a different approach, and it's been good to me. So I think, Rick, you just said if you respect it, you love it, and that's 100% true. You know, from a cultivation standpoint, I love it. From the cultural standpoint, it's meant a lot to me within the communities I've always kind of been associated with. And so, you know, watching these bands on tour and things, cannabis was always okay there. So whether we were watching Fish in Wisconsin or Indianapolis or, you know, Ohio, local regulatory structure became less of an issue at those events, you know, and again, I think that's a polite way of putting it, but it was part of the culture there. And so we have such direct availability to be able to merge these two things. You know, I say it was kind of slapping me in the face with what I was supposed to do with these components of my life. And so we're just grateful to be part of this kind of emergent thing here from the licensed event side. Obviously, events have been happening for a long time, but this is a more recent thing for our pocket of the state. So we just want to do right by the community, and cannabis is kind of where we are.
Right on. And you're working with, I think, who's recognized as a good player, and also additionally with a good brand associated, one of our sponsors, Redemption. So I was glad to hear that when you said that. And I'm very aware of Green Stem as being you know, a conscientious participant, you know, in the industry. And some people have had issue with some people participating in various ways. That discussion doesn't even have to happen, you know, through this event. And I was just getting, before we got to kind of wrap up within a couple of minutes, but you mentioned the culture and some other you know, aspects of consideration. You know, when you're looking at this, when you're looking at the commercial market, you can kind of tell who's participating and who is aware of the culture and the history here in Michigan, and who may not be, and who you might want to gravitate toward over others. I'll take the shaking head up as a yes.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we've been plugged into the medical and caregiver side of it, and so transitioning over to the license side did come with some moral dilemmas for myself, and you know, that was pretty clear early on. And to be honest, I said things in some meetings with some people who were potentially going to be involved that, I mean, I'm glad I said, because it was the God's honest truth, but probably led to what could have been some larger sponsorships and things, whatever. So
you can make the jump into the world and have a philosophical approach. It doesn't have to compromise.
And not accept money from people that you know are knowingly trying to attack our system. Right.
Correct. And so there is responsible expansion of the industry and responsible and so it's been nice to see the good people. You know what I mean? It's always nice to see the good people.
Hey man, we're within moments here of having to end. So any final thoughts? And thanks for coming on and joining us today.
No, I appreciate you guys having us on. We're really looking forward to the festival we put together. We're just very grateful to be where we are, doing what we are, and the Cannabis Crown is. I think it's going to be a good time for the community. A lot of great music, and for those that want to learn, the staff and teams of these facilities will be there. I know a lot of great cultivators who will be there as attendants, and it's a good time for a conversation about our community.
Right on. Thanks a lot, man. Josh, anything else you want to say before we wrap it up?
No, just thanks for having me on. And if you guys ever need a lab guy, by all means, let me know. I'll jump on. I'm always looking to help out, or if you got questions on anything.
No, I really appreciate it, man. Very interesting stuff. Anton?
Another great show. Rick, look forward to hanging out with you soon. I'll be there tomorrow, so should be good times. Can't wait.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. So, Rick, you want to wrap us up?
I sure do. Look, there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding Director Brisbo's departure. Who will be replacing him? Is it a person from a law enforcement background? Is it a person from a legal background? Those people traditionally don't do so well trying to manage an industry of people like ourselves. We can only hope that they choose someone with Director Brisbo's temperament and patience. But our industry moves forward despite all the different challenges. We heard a lot of opportunities today, too. A lot of chances for growth in the industry, new events, things that are taking place. So don't focus on the news of the moment. Focus on the outlook for the entire industry, because it certainly is bright and shiny.
Right on. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Jazz Cabbage Cafe next week. See you guys.